Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. I know this is a controversial thing to say. I know it's a very contentious issue. It's likely to make the BLM activist types lose their minds when I say it. But in my view, the Derek Chauvin case was arguably one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in modern American history. And frankly, I think it exposes everything wrong with the left, the media, and the corrupt justice system all in one single event. I think it proves how gullible the emotional leftist mob is, how easily the deep state can fabricate a narrative to feed their useful idiots the emotional content that they need in order to activate the protest/rioting machine while collecting billions in fundraising dollars. And I know so badly the left and the media wants this to be a no-go subject. Don't touch it, don't say it, don't question it, because then of course you're automatically labeled an extremist. But I've been saying this for years. What happened to Derek Chauvin, in my view, I believe was wrong. And I've been recording a Derek Chauvin video at least once every 2 months for the last 2 years. I always like to bring this subject back, not because of anything personal. I don't really care about Derek Chauvin, not because I'm an extremist or a white supremacist or whatever the left would suggest. No, simply because I think it was a miscarriage of justice. I truly believe that Derek Chauvin was found guilty in the court of public opinion. I believe he was legally railroaded. I think there's holes in this case, and I guess now I'm not the only one. As Ben Shapiro just called for Donald Trump to pardon Derek Chauvin, at least on the federal charges, and it seems as though the message might be getting to the White House, as Elon Musk responds and basically says, we're going to look into it. So again, quite the controversial subject, and I know the BLM activists are going to be losing their minds at hearing this, but this is a conversation that needs to happen nationally again, but without all the immediate spin, with the emotion toned down, a conversation just about the facts. Let's try to kickstart that conversation, shall we? We've got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so here's the Ben Shapiro video that's taking the internet by storm. Take a look.
If we are issuing pardons, however, there is one person that President Trump should pardon from federal charges forthwith. That person is Derek Chauvin. The evidence demonstrates that Derek Chauvin did not, in fact, commit murder of George Floyd. George Floyd was high on fentanyl. He had a significant pre-existing heart condition. George Floyd was saying he could not breathe before he was even out of the car. Derek Chauvin, for large segments of even the tape that was shown, had his knee on George Floyd's shoulder or back, not on his neck. The autopsy of George Floyd showed that he had no damage to his trachea, that probably George Floyd died of excited delirium. There were no accusations, even at trial, that Derek Chauvin had committed a hate crime against George Floyd or that he targeted George Floyd because of his race. Nonetheless, on the basis of extraordinarily scanty evidence, and despite the fact that there was massive pressure on the jury, that the mayor of Minneapolis paid a settlement to the George Floyd family immediately, that the President of the United States suggested that Derek Chauvin was guilty right off the bat, that the jurors were being openly threatened and admitted as much. Despite all of that, Derek Chauvin was convicted on federal charges and pled guilty to federal charges. Derek Chauvin should, in fact, be pardoned on that. I think it is worthwhile to remember that there is a man who is rotting in prison because the media decided in the middle of 2020 that they were going to turn a tragic law enforcement stop that ended with the death of a man who had a significant problem with drugs and pre-existing health problems into the raison d'etre of the entire 2020 election. And it led to vast chaos. It led to, again, the destruction of racial comedy in the United States, $2 billion in property damage, and a guy rotting in prison who the evidence demonstrates certainly was not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in that case. If we're going to talk about delivering pardons, President Trump, I think, should really seriously consider pardoning on federal charges. He can't pardon on state charges Derek Chauvin, who is convicted of the murder of George Floyd.
I think Ben Shapiro is basically 100% right here. Derek Chauvin is essentially a political prisoner. And let's just quickly go over the facts. Something, of course, the left hates more than anything. During the time of his arrest, George Floyd was high on fentanyl and other hard drugs. Then, of course, there's the one quote that everybody always says, "I can't breathe," which the left has always presented as if Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's neck and that's why he was saying he couldn't breathe, when in reality, if you watch the full video, he was saying that basically the entire time, even while he was just sitting in the squad car, which of course creates quite the confusion for the police officers who were dealing with him at the time. He's been basically saying this the entire time. Should we take him seriously this time? Not to mention, police officers are trained in this kind of thing because they're constantly dealing with people who are making claims like that. And the general practice is, if you can speak, well, it's likely that you could breathe. If truly you are choking, you wouldn't be able to get enough air out to be able to even speak in the first place. There's also video evidence that kind of shows that Derek Chauvin had his knee on George Floyd's back or his back shoulder blade Floyd rather than his neck. From what we understand, there was no damage to Floyd's trachea, no evidence of suffocation, yet the media pushed the "I can't breathe" quote nonstop, which stoked flames on the race riots that caused billions of dollars in damages and got innocent people killed. Then, of course, there's the body cam footage.
I see your other hand. Please, was on both hands.
If we look at the initial autopsy report, it shows that George Floyd had a lethal dose of drug cocktail in his system at the time of his passing. And so it bears the question, was this a homicide? Was it a murder? Was there intent behind the murder? Or were these police officers simply apprehending somebody who had committed a crime, going along with the motions and doing as they're taught and how they're trained? The way that I understand a fentanyl overdose is basically that your body just stops breathing. You become so sedated that your basic biological function just stops. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a doctor, but I don't think an opioid overdose causes inflammation in your airways and then blocking your tubes, stopping you from being able to breathe. I'm pretty sure you just stop breathing and then your brain stops getting oxygen. Based on my analysis, it feels like that's a much more likely explanation. And at the end of the day, it's really about the evidence. Does the evidence, without a shadow of a doubt, prove that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd? I don't think so at all. In fact, I think there's a whole lot of doubt, and in cases of doubt, especially in a situation involving police officers apprehending criminals, there's a lot of factors, and the idea that we would be locking these police officers behind bars and throwing away the keys without absolute undeniable proof when there's so many questions still unanswered, not to mention the cultural environment that's surrounded in the news media, the Democrat activism, it's simply just a case that must be revisited. And so I agree with the call from Ben Shapiro. I think, personally, that maybe a manslaughter charge could apply here, but the charges of murder that were dropped, I think they're wrong. And I think the right thing to do is a pardon on the federal charges. Now, of course, that wouldn't affect the state charges that Derek Chauvin is currently sentenced under, but at least it draws attention to the issue, which again, I think is the fair thing to do. We gotta have this conversation again. We gotta have it honestly, with all the facts and both perspectives laid out effectively, and of course in an environment that's not so heightened emotionally. I think Derek Chauvin should be pardoned, and I think he should be granted the privilege of a retrial. And I don't think that's a crazy thing to say, and neither apparently does Elon Musk. Elon actually responded to the Ben Shapiro video and wrote something to think about. And so now I guess this thing is going all the way to the top, to the president's desk. And really, I think the sentiment is perfect. It really is something that we ought to think about, ought to have a conversation about. And again, it's not about Derek Chauvin. It's about whether or not the justice system got it right, or whether politics or the activist culture of the time drove the verdict just to appease the mob. But anyways, we might be relitigating the George Floyd situation, and so I guess let's just see what happens. Things might get a little interesting here. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to leave a like and possibly subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.